the parshandi being void bringers. I am that emoji with like the brain exploding. As Shallan and Jasnah were like figuring it out together, and the moment they said smoke and ash, but more specifically, like the in-sync singing, I was like, oh my God, it's the parshandi. And then I read it. Ugh. That is an insane connection, and one that I think is the coolest so far that this book specifically has given us. The Voidbringers had a natural, real-world correlate, Jasnah said firmly. I'm certain of it. Something caused the legends. What was it? Jasnah handed Shallan a page of notes. These are the best I've been able to find. Read them. Tell me what you think. Shallan scanned the page. Some of the quotes, or at least the concepts, were familiar to her from what she'd read already. Suddenly dangerous, like a calm day that became a tempest. They were real, Jasnah repeated. Beings of ash and fire. We fought with them, Jasnah said. We fought so often that men began to speak of the creatures in metaphor. 100 battles, 10 tenfolds. Flame and shard, skin so terrible, eyes like pits of blackness, music when they kill. We defeated them, Jasnah said. Shallan felt a chill. But the legends lie about one thing, Jasnah continued. They claim we chased the Voidbringers off the face of Roshar, or destroyed them. But that's not how humans work. We don't throw away something we can use. Shallan rose, walking to the edge of the balcony, looking out at the lift, which was slowly being lowered by its two porters. Parshmen, with skin of black and red, ash and fire, Stormfather. Shallan whispered, horrified. We didn't destroy the Voidbringers, Jasnah said from behind, her voice haunted. We enslaved them. That, I think, is more chilling than the visions that Shallan was having, which I discovered what those were. Especially because later on, they discuss how Parshmen are literally etched into every part of their society, and people are with them 24/7. And if they can potentially learn to communicate to each other all once again, everyone is screwed. And that is bone chilling. And it was interesting because as I was reading these last over 500 pages, it was specifically, I think, in the moment when the Parshman, who was part of Bridge 4, saw the dead body of the Parshandi, and he was freaking out, getting really upset and wanting to protect him. And I was like, what if the Parshandi are mad that majority of their family was made into slaves? And so that's why they attacked and killed Gavilar. As you all know, I love my dear Dalinar, and his arc I felt was a little weak. Wait. As he went charging into his nephew's room and beat the crap out of him. Dalinar whooped his butt. And let me just say, that is the full arc that we needed in this book for Dalinar. And specifically because, one, it completed his arc, but two, this was the moment where I truly felt he stopped being guilty. I feel that the action he did for Kaladin, which was giving up his shard blade, was a big deal, but it was more specifically the way he confronted Elhokar. And I felt like in that moment, he was done being apologetic, he was done feeling guilty, he was done being ashamed, he was done hiding. And he was making it very clear that he was not going to put up with any more of this nonsense anymore. And truly, really sticking to what he believes that the codes mean. Adolin said something to me a few weeks back, something profound. He asked me why I forced my sons to live up to such high expectations, but let others go about their errant ways without condemnation. I have been treating the other high princes and their light eyes like adults. An adult can take a principle and adapt it to his needs, but we're not ready for that yet. We're children, and when you're teaching a child, you require him to do what is right until he grows old enough to make his own choices. The Silver Kingdoms didn't begin as unified, glorious bastions of honor. They were trained that way, raised up like youths, nurtured to maturity. So that quote specifically, I feel was when he really understood, it wasn't fair that he was just making his army and his sons live up to what he was saying. If he really wants to be High Prince of War, he has to make everyone do what he says, including putting Elhokar in his place, who very much acting like a child as a prince. And I know that he's technically not like his hand. They don't really have that type of thing in this book, but those are essentially why those are important, because sometimes the king needs someone that loves them, they can trust them, and gonna guide them in the right place. And that's essentially what Dalinar is for Elhokar. He loves him like a son. He doesn't want to take the throne anymore. He wants to protect him and have him be successful as the king. But in order to do that, Dalinar had to tell him and show him how it is and not be afraid of what he was going to say or how he would take it. Especially when he told him about him and Navani, which I will get to shortly. Kaladin. You know I love Kaladin. He's one of my favorite characters, but it started to get into a point of like, woe is me jump rope. Like he figured it out. Woe is me. Figured it out. Woe is me. And I get that this whole balancing back and forth is like a representation of depression, but also for the sake of story, it felt like it went on for way too long and was unwarranted after everything that he's gone through. So that was kind of like my only caveat about his full overall arc. He did do a good job though at some point, basically saying, fuck it all, I'm taking responsibility for what I did, and I'm just moving on with life and accepting that like the gods aren't taunting me or this or that. And so that was important, but because we had that moment and it was so big and it was super earned, it frustrated me when we still dipped back and forth between him being like, woe is me, I can't save everyone. It was really cool discovering more about how the Spren work, specifically his relationship with Syl, and that she binds things and that he has power of like the Knights of Radiant. So I thought that was fun discovering that sort of mystery, and it was written very well and all of it made sense. But honestly, as time went on, I would say I'm in general more just like in love with the Bridge 4 crew, and I bunch Kaladin into that. And I think their story, overall story, it's one of my favorites in the books just because I think it's so well written, very fleshed out, everything was earned, and they went through like a lot of struggle before they really earned the proper like reward and arc for all of them. So I thought that was super solid. I love that Dalinar protected these bridgemen, thanked them for what he did, really showed his honor. And there was mirroring about him in Kaladin, because Kaladin chose to not take the shard sword and the shard plate that he earned because he didn't like what it represented and that it had killed his men, and he didn't want to be like that. So when Dalinar gave up his shard sword to protect Kaladin and all his men, I felt that that really showed that they are two very similar men who both stand for honor. And I thought that was like really cool and poetic how Brandon did that. Being together, eating rock stew, listening to the quiet chatter while the fire crackled and popped, sending dancing flakes of yellow light into the air. This was more relaxing than sleep could be. Kaladin smiled, leaning back, looking up toward the dark sky and the large sapphire moon. Then he closed his eyes, listening. 27 men lived. He'd finally managed to save someone. For now, that was enough. Shallan. I've decided she's my favorite character, and I will explain why, but I do have a few caveats. It's more so with how Brandon wrote things in her story. So when Shallan made the soul casting discovery, I felt that her believing Jasnah had a fake soul casting was a little loose, but then I felt like it pushed even farther when she said Jasnah was soul casting with nothing. And my issue with this is because for so long with Shallan, we'd focused more about her trying to deal with her anxiety, deal with confrontation, accepting herself and her faults and the choices she makes in life and not worrying about the consequences and what people think of her. She's never really been given sort of a detective side. Like, she struggled to figure out how to use the soulcaster. She couldn't even figure out what the Ardent capsule was doing. I feel like we weren't given this investigative side of her. She's smart, but in a different way, not in that sort of like insight observant way. So it felt a little forced. However, one of my friends said that when he reread the book, he felt like all the breadcrumbs were there. So maybe I missed them, but on a first read, that's the impression that I got. But overall, her story and her arc of accepting herself and trusting herself, I think is super solid. And she truly feels like one of the most real characters in this book. Like, as a human, pick her off the page, most relatable, super vulnerable, super flawed, but still has a lot of good things about her that she herself cannot see, which is really sad. That's not enough, the voice whispered. I must know something true about you. Tell me. The stronger the truth, the more hidden it is, the more powerful the bond. Tell me, what are you? What am I? Shallan whispered. Truthfully, it was a day for confrontation. She felt strangely strong, steady. Time to speak it. I'm a murderer. I killed my father. Ah, the voice whispered. A powerful truth indeed. So it was funny because I actually had a feeling that she killed her father based on a lot of the breadcrumbs that were left just from her experiencing, like looking back and flashbacks and things. But I feel like that moment of her owning up to saying that out loud was completely earned because all the lessons that Jasnah has taught her through being her ward, and then specifically the lessons she taught her through their philosophy training, understanding like what your morals are and ethics are and taking responsibility for your choices and why you do them, and like accepting that deep ownership inside yourself and still loving yourself. So when she stole the Soulcaster from Jasnah, she did it because she believed that Jasnah didn't deserve it, wasn't doing it for the right reasons. And whether or not like you think like Shallan was wrong in that, the lesson I believe there was more about her finally making a decision, accepting it, and being proud of it. She still felt bad that she stole it because of how kind Jasnah had been to her, but she didn't fall back on her belief of Jasnah not deserving the Soulcaster. It's very human to still feel guilt about what you're doing, but still feel morally right about what you're doing. Again, human feeling versus whether or not it's right or wrong. And that is essentially what Jasnah wanted Shallan to understand, because Jasnah went out there in the alley making the decision to kill those men who have been causing problems, terror, murder, all these awful things in the city, and the king wasn't doing anything about it, and that really bothered her. So she didn't feel like she was committing murder. She felt like she was taking responsibility for what the king wasn't doing. And yes, that's a gray sort of area where you're like, Jasnah, is that really your right to do? And that's what Shallan was so upset about. And Jasnah said, that's my decision, and this is the philosophy lesson I'm teaching you today. So that was super solid, and I loved it. And I think Shallan's arc it's beautiful. And again, she feels the most real. Also, I'm officially monetized. Yay! Thank you guys so much for all your amazing support. And I want to let you know that since I'm now monetized, it has been unlocked on the channel that you can join and become a member of the YouTube channel and support me that way. Or again, I have a Patreon, or you can also support me on Buy Me a Coffee, which you all are seriously the best, and I love this bookish community. Again, since I said Shallan felt the most real to me, Kaladin and Dalinar, which I think for writing purposes is totally fine, they felt like very much heroic archetypes to me. As much as I enjoyed their story, that's still why I feel that Shallan is the best written. Jasnah still comes off too perfect. I know that she like admits her flaws and stuff, but it still felt like she still held everything together and she wasn't messy like a real human. And yes, I've been told that we find out more about Jasnah in other books, but I'm speaking specifically to The Way of Kings and what happened in this book. And again, she just feels too like tied up and perfect. Even though I love her, it's my only caveat. And then I'll say the next runner up next to Shallan for feeling like very much a real person was Navani. I love her struggle of no longer being the queen. She's the mother of the queen, but then she doesn't really have a place at court, but they still want her to act like a retired queen and enjoy all these lavish things, but that's not her. She's an intelligent woman. She's a scientist. She wants to make discoveries, but they don't want her doing that. And they also don't want her to partake in the gossip, even though that's what she's supposed to do. And so I felt that Brandon wrote her really well. The only thing I didn't like that I didn't understand, and if it's a part of a clue for another book, that's fine. I'm talking about specifically standalone, if I just read Way of Kings. Her writing the glyph when or painting it or whatever, when she thought that Dalinar had died, felt really off to me. One, we've never really seen her express her feelings through painting or drawing like we have with Shallan, which would have made way more sense to me. And then she said that like right before she does it, all the bridge crews would have come back with Sadeas. And the way that I read that was she was gonna go outside to check and see if all the bridge crews had come back. Had she done that, she'd have realized that one was still out there on the field. And for a woman who has been written so intelligent and strong, and even when she does waver, she's still proud in her vulnerability, that didn't sit with me well. But again, there's a specific moment when Navani's asking Dalinar to be with her. It was just written so well. Let me read you the quote. "That's fine. I'm happy you do. But it's been 6 years, and all anyone can see me as is the wife of a dead man. The other women they humor with idle gossip, but they won't let me into their political circles. They think I'm a relic. You wanted to know why I came back so quickly? I returned," she said, "because I have no home. I'm expected to sit out of important events because my husband is dead, lounge around pampered but ignored. I make them uncomfortable. The queen, the other women at court. I'm sorry, Dalinar said, but I don't. She raised her free hand, tapping him on the chest. I won't take it from you, Dalinar. We were friends before I even met Gavilar. You still know me as me, not some shadow of a rain that crumbled years ago. Don't you? She looked at him pleading. Blood of my fathers, Dalinar thought with shock. She's crying. 2 small tears. He had rarely seen her so sincere, and so he kissed her. It's so good, so raw, it's so vulnerable, and she's not afraid to show how she's feeling, and there's so much strength in it, and especially for how many women get treated, whether it's in this way of king society or in real life. It was so true and so real, and I just felt like Brandon really understood that and wrote that moment so well. Chef's kiss. And speaking of them, Navani got that blackthorn, Navani got that blackthorn. It took way too long, in my opinion, but it was wonderful. You guys, I like romance. Sue me, I'm human. We're gonna bring it back to, I think it was episode 2? The hospitals? I thought that was a good idea. Thing specifically that I discovered about world building while we were reading about Shallan is I like that sort of they keep their knowledge like behind a paywall, which yes can kind of be messed up, especially because then you sort of keep people down from rising up. But considering that this city, like they said, they don't have much to offer besides fish and bells, which holds no interest, knowledge is the highest thing that they have of value, and that money goes towards keeping the hospitals up to date, which I think is like really cool that the king does that and provides a lot, especially because like if knowledge is your most valuable thing, people will come to your city and pay for it, and then you can keep the hospitals going, which is really important. Dude, the king of Kharbranith is evil. And as I was writing the script, I made an edit because I remember that they were talking, Bridge 4 was talking about escaping to Kharbranith, and Rock was like, they don't have slaves, they'll accept us in. I'm like, I mean, they don't have the typical versions of slaves in society, but he certainly has his own down in the basement that he uses for his experiments. All because he wants to hear like the prophecies that they're saying. And then it was definitely very interesting that he essentially is the one towards the end that had hired Szeth to start killing off a lot of these kings and high princes. I don't know what he has in store, but the hospital thing was the most interesting to me, and you guys were right. I didn't know. I am exhausted, y'all. This book, this hunka-chunka book is no joke. I mean, look at all these tabs. The post, oh, they're gonna show ya. Post-its. I think it's super awesome, so epic. I love the characters so much, and I'm utterly obsessed with them. I think they're written so well. And again, like I said, the mystery behind the Voidbringers and the Parshandi is my favorite. However, the Sanderstorm, I prefer that term. The Sanderstorm did not hit me until page 900. Around that time, I discovered what the whole point of the Way of Kings title was. That's like almost the whole book before I kind of like really got the stuff. And if it was like a 300-page book and it did that, I'd be more okay with it. But say you're dating someone and they're asking for a lot, but giving very little in return. And this is sort of how that book made me feel. It asked for a lot of my time to read all the 1,000 pages, but I only got stuff at the very end. And that hurts me a little bit. I need to take a break from the Stormlight Archives. It is to be determined if I will return to this series.